Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 697 for the 13th of February, 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia. It's been raining lately, still very muggy. And a few nights ago I happened to be working downtown Sydney and huge lightning storms were rolling through. It was quite a sight. And what is also quite a sight are the thousands of people protesting in Canberra, our nation's capital, vaguely about vaccination, but they are a gaggle of conspiracy theorists and freedom fighters and this sort of thing. And I've seen them complain online, well, some of them anyway, that the mainstream media are ignoring the story. Part of the conspiracy, you see. Well, the mainstream media are not ignoring the story. That's where I've been watching it. But conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers and freedom fighters, I hate to tell you this, but it's just not that big a deal. I mean, you are a tiny minority of the population's protesting in the streets. Yeah, that's sort of interesting, sort of. There's a few arrests. Yeah, that's sort of interesting. But don't think you're that important. Don't think that the world or the Australia will stop and just be glued to the set to see what you're doing and your important actions and your declarations and whatever legally binding things you think you're passing. So, yeah, you've got the legal right to protest. Do it peacefully. And my message to you is get vaccinated. And the other thing I think I would note about these people is amongst their own tribe or gaggle of tribes, they really think they're on the verge of making a difference or forcing the government out or changing everything and the revolution is here, so to speak. But I certainly hope the event doesn't turn into a super spreader with thousands of people marching around without masks. But anyway, let's get on to what's on this week's episode of the Skeptic Zone. And maybe this does relate to the freedom fighters and the protesters and the anti-vaxxers and the conspiracy theorists in Canberra. I'm going to start with a piece I wrote for the Skeptic magazine last year called Any Day Now. I promise. And this is about keeping believers on the hook year after year after year with the promise that any day now the truth will be revealed. And this deals with all sorts of things, from UFOs to the return of various deities to all sorts of things. Then we have the Australian Skeptics newsletter, read once again by Adrian Hill in Canada, but written by Tim Mendham. What will we learn this week? Then to round off the show, we go back to the Trove archives where we do a search for references to numerology. And this was inspired by the story that Adrian Hill brought us last week about the number 7. Well, I noticed in various parts of the country, life is sort of getting back to normal in a sense. And a good friend of mine recently went to an outdoor music event. And wow, imagine that, getting back to life and enjoying music again in the park or a band or a concert or something like that. We can be optimistic. And that's largely thanks to the vast majority of the population who, like me and you, I'm sure, have rolled up their sleeves to get vaccinated again, and boosted. Stay tuned at the end of the show for more announcements from me, but now it's time for me to run downstairs and have a pancake waffle. How about that? A pancake waffle. Figure that one out. Will I do that? I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Any day now. This is an article from the pages of The Skeptic, the journal from Australian Skeptics, and this comes to us from Volume 41, Number 3, which was in September of 2021. And don't forget you can subscribe to the Skeptic magazine at skeptics.com.au. And while you're there, you can take advantage of the extensive archive of the magazine you can download for free. Almost 40 years worth of articles, news and information. Any day now. I promise. Richard Saunders looks at the bait that keeps believers hooked for years, decades, centuries, and millennia. In May 2021, the 7 TV network in Australia broadcast 7 News Spotlight Special. The phenomenon reveals the truth about UFOs, or as they are increasingly being referred to, UAPs, or Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. After about 70 years of reports of UFOs, keeping in mind that the term UFO is taken by most people to mean alien spaceship, it's about time a TV network was brave enough to spill the beans. The special, which is available online at tinyurl.com/YVYNBVM7, advertised with much fanfare, was presented by journalist and former reporter on 60 Minutes, Ross Coulthart, who happens to be also spruiking his new book, In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. Unfortunately, the beans he spilled were very old and reheated together with some newer flashy beans that turned out to be more flash in the pan. It is not the intention of this report to analyse all the accounts in the TV special, but in brief, we were treated to many eyewitness accounts, conspiracies of cover-ups, and repeated showings of the recent so-called pyramid UFOs from a video shot by a US Navy serviceman. Spoiler, the UFOs turned out to be an airliner shot out of focus. See the elegant examination of this by Mick West at tinyurl.com/BEDFC9B7. What is important to note is the video used repeatedly in the 90-minute TV special had been debunked well before transmission. Indeed, I even pointed this fact out to the 7 Network weeks before. But why let the facts get in the way of a good story? Checkered history. This recent UFO TV special joins the long list of other UFO specials presented over the decades. We have, to name but a few, 1970, Chariots of the Gods; 1976, Overlords of the UFO; 1977, Mystery of the Gods; 1979, It Has Begun; 1980, UFO Syndrome; 1995, Alien Autopsy; 1997, Australian UFOs and Alien Encounters Down Under; and 2005, the UFO phenomenon, Seeing is Believing. Now, I predict in about 5 to 7 years we'll have yet another special promising that any day now we'll know the truth. A promise repeated throughout the decades. In an ABC radio interview in July 2021, Ross Coulthart said, "I think there is evidence to support the notion that the United States government is about to tell the world something quite momentous. And I think they've known it for many, many years. And I've spoken to people at a very high level in defense and intelligence circles in the US who tell me that the United States is in possession of extraordinary information, and I'm privy to some of it, but not a lot of it. But I think it does involve the possibility that we are not alone." In other words, any day now, this promise, this tantalizing promise, carries a great deal of meaning to believers and not just those who know the aliens are already here or coming tomorrow. The idea that what you think is right and soon you'll be vindicated has tremendous power, and that power has been used ever since Adam was a boy. The end is nigh. Which brings us to the topic of religious fundamentalism. We can clearly see how this any day now promise, in this case let's single out the return of Christ, has been used for millennia. I remember in the 1970s, one of our Sunday school teachers telling us that she knew that we were living in the end times as the signs were everywhere, and any day now Christ would return and do whatever it is he promised to do. It gave her a strong sense of reassurance that what she truly believed was in fact true, but she was only the next link in a long chain of her predecessors who also knew that they were also living in the end times, stretching back generations. Come the 2000s, and we have countless examples of the same promise when it comes to Christianity, other religions and cults. In 2011, billboards appeared in Sydney and around the world from Harold Camping, who predicted the second coming of Christ on May 21st, whereupon the saved would be taken up to heaven in the rapture. His many followers were thrilled that any day now their faith would be rewarded. When the day came and went, Camping changed the date to October, and the faithful prepared yet again, and again nothing happened. Camping's big mistake, and the same mistake was made by Jehovah's Witnesses, was to set an actual date for the promise. The real power comes from it being kept vague. In that way, it avoids a used-by date. Sadly, we have seen too many times what the real fate of cult members can be in cases such as Jonestown or Heaven's Gate. Putting the return of Christ to one side, the promise has also long since been used by creationists, where it comes in the form of the claim that more and more scientists are rejecting evolution, and by implication, any day now, creationism will be accepted by the mainstream. Even at the time of writing, on the front page of the website of the Discovery Institute is the feature story titled "Some of the Growing Number of Scientists Who Doubt the Darwinian Theory of Evolution Speak Out." This news is sure to give hope to those sending in their donations. The medical arena. This promise is nothing if not versatile, and it's found in all manner of other beliefs. We find it in full force when it comes to alternative medicine, and is used in the form of any day now. The rest of science will catch up to what the practitioner and the adherents know is true. This slogan has been used for homeopathy in particular, and again, even as I write, "Homeopathy is indeed waiting for science to catch up," is used on a prominent homeopathy site. It makes perfect sense to those who trust in homeopathy and spend their hard-earned on it, and gives them, like the creationists, a sense of hope and peace of mind. The darker side of this promise manifests itself as fear when it comes to the crusade cry of, for example, anti-vaccination conspiracy theorists. The fear is that any day now, the one world government will succeed in its plans to subjugate or exterminate the population via vaccines, and it is up to us to stop it from happening. Send your donation, and together we can fight this threat. The threat of the evil government never comes, but is forever just about to start coming true. The promise that binds the UFO believer to the creationist, to the homeopath, to the anti-vax conspiracy theorist, and so on, is so much more than mere hope, or in some cases fear. It is a firm expectation based on what they know in their hearts to be true. It is akin to someone unable to cut their losses and walk away from the poker table, but instead investing more good money after bad, as Any day now, the cards will favour them. We can sympathise with these people as they are, like the rest of us, only human. Where our compassion and understanding gives out is when we discover those who know full well the end times are not coming, or that magic sugar water will not heal, or that UFOs are a relic of another era, fit only for TV specials and yet more books, but are ready and willing to use the any day now promise to achieve their ends, be it monetary or, sadly in many cases, power over others. They willfully exploit this facet of human nature for their own advancement or gratification. I imagine they also fall prey to another facet of human nature, that is the ability to justify their behavior to themselves, thus easing their conscience. Any day now, I hope more and more people will become more skeptical and adopt critical thinking as a guide in their lives. You see, we can all live in hope. About the author. Richard Saunders is a life member of the Australian Skeptics and producer/host of the Skeptic Zone podcast. And that was Any Day Now, I promise. And that appeared in the pages of The Skeptic, the journal from Australian Skeptics, volume 41, number 3 from September 2021. And you can download most back issues of the Skeptic magazine by visiting www.skeptics.com.au, and most of those issues are completely free.
Hola, les habla Paula desde la hermosa ciudad de Buenos Aires, en Argentina. Cuando escuchamos podcasts, escuchamos los mismos que escucha todo el mundo, como The Skeptic Zone. Ojalá puedan venir a visitarnos algún día. Los esperamos con nuestras riquísimas comidas locales y hasta podemos ir a bailar un tango. Mientras tanto, sigan disfrutando de su dosis semanal de ciencia y pensamiento racional. ¡Chao!
Hello everyone, it's Adrienne Hill from Canada, land of waffles, snow, and truckers loudly protesting vaccination mandates, here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics newsletter. This is newsletter number 141. You can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's get to the newsletter and see what Tim Mendham, a new CSI fellow, congratulations Tim, has lined up for us. Hi all, says Tim. Another almost COVID-free newsletter. Instead, we have variations of pseudoscience and miracles, geomancy, poltergeists, uses of DNA, etc. Of course, if you do want a bit more on COVID, you could do a lot worse than go to this interactive graphics discussion in The Guardian that looks at, quote, a relatively simple way of giving people important context about the number of deaths and ICU hospitalizations with COVID between vaccinated and unvaccinated people, end quote. Read on. Tim. Okay, Tim, we will. The first item is, quote, professional misconduct, end quote, for calling pseudoscience, quote, pseudoscience, end quote, India. The Kerala State Medical Council for Indian Systems of Medicine has served a notice of professional misconduct on a liver specialist doctor who has been accused of, quote, defaming, end quote, Ayurveda and calling the traditional branch of medicine a, quote, pseudoscience, end quote, as it should be. How Brazil survived President's vaccine skepticism. Make that vaccine denial rather than skepticism. But as this story outlines, Brazil put its trust in vaccination programs, even as the president tried to undermine confidence in them. Gender bias in Peridolia. A new study suggests that when people experience face Peridolia, most visualize a young male face. The study, the article says, may help explain why there is a man, not a woman, in the moon, or why Jesus appears in toasted sandwiches more often than Mary. Except, of course, in China. That's a rabbit in the moon, though we're not sure if that's a buck or a doe. Facial recognition from DNA. An Israeli company called Coresight AI claims it can create a model of a face using a person's DNA that can then be fed into a facial recognition system. A highly dubious, not to mention ethically fraught, claim that has experts calling foul. Scientific investigation of poltergeists. We're in two minds about this one. It earnestly tries to make a serious scientific case and points out problems of hoaxing and wishful thinking, not to mention frustration. Quote, serious poltergeist investigators have a lot of experience of failing to find poltergeist activity, end quote. But there is an ongoing tinge of, quote, it's real. We just have to prove it, end quote. Religious people and ghost hunting shows. A strange piece that could easily go down to the end of this newsletter with the silly stuff because of the sloppy conclusions. Quote, Christian people actually watch slightly more often than agnostic people, but not a significant enough amount more that we could conclusively say they watched more. But it was surprising to see that just a little bit more they watch, so that pretty much or that disproved our hypothesis. We were incorrect, end quote. Try to make sense of that. Oh my God. And later, quote, religion and interest in ghost hunting shows do not correlate. An interesting discovery was that spiritual people seem to be much less interested in ghost hunting shows, end quote. Figure that one out. What is Feng Shui? Another story that could easily go down to the bottom of the newsletter, especially as it makes only a fleeting reference that most experts think it's pseudoscience. But the article at least outlines some of the basics of the geomancy practice, for reference purposes only. Bring back the One. A plea to bring back the TV program that pitched psychics against each other to find the genuine article. The writer of this piece calls the show, which ran in 2008 and 2011, quote, the pinnacle of entertainment, end quote, and suggests it's time for a reboot. The original show featured our own Richard Saunders as one of the hosts. Hint, he was the skeptical one. Oh my, more Richard Saunders on TV? Could we take it? Yes, I think we can. We're working on the March 2022 issue of The Skeptic. But in the meantime, you really can't go past the December 2021 issue. It features complete coverage of the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, possibly the largest of its kind ever undertaken, and is destined to be a reference for future discussion on the topic of psychics. The issue also features articles that analyze common myths about COVID by anti-vaxxers, the Nuremberg Code's supposed implications on vaccines as experimentation, and vaccine compensation schemes, proof that vaccines are more dangerous than authorities claim. Both articles make great reference works to put in front of a hesitant or anti-vax people who cite such claims. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can have each new issue delivered to your inbox for half price. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Events. While some skeptics groups are running their regular Skeptics in the Pub get-togethers online, same talks but bring your own beer, an increasing number are returning to the live face-to-face format. Check your local guides to see when and where such activities are on, or if they are on, considering any COVID restrictions. Skeptics in action. If you have any ideas for stories or want to contribute to Skeptics communications, such as the magazine or Facebook page, or just have something you want to get off your chest, then you're welcome to get in touch. News leads should be sent to newstips@skeptics.com.au. Submissions for the magazine, etc. should go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Comments and suggestions should go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Items of interest. Travel tip number 1. UK's most haunted homes, which includes 3 castles, 2 stately homes, and 1 decrepit pub, which is not really a home. In fact, it's not even a pub, as it has been closed for years. We commented on this place in the last newsletter. Travel tip number 2. True or false exhibition in Canada. A fun science exhibition that challenges attendees to use their reasoning skills to separate fact from fiction. The first introductory panel starts with, quote, "Are you a skeptic or not? Because you should be," end quote. It runs until May 21st at the Joseph Brant Museum in Burlington, Ontario, in Canada. Sounds worthwhile if you're in the area, especially since spring in Ontario can be quite lovely. 10 best films about psychics. A decent list with films stretching back beyond the, quote, "There are no films older than 10 years, end quote, limit of most creators of such lists. And a few psychic busters as well. Psychic life after pop. If you are over 30, like I am, you probably don't know the UK pop group S Club 7, which I didn't. But it's comforting to know that one of its members, Paul Cattermole, has picked himself up from hard times following his departure from the group and has started a career as a psychic detective. He charges callers £2.25 per minute for readings or £39.95 for 20 minutes. If you have any doubts of his abilities, you can rest assured as, quote, "I have been trained and passed by the Spiritual Studio Professional Accreditation Body," end quote, which we've never heard of, but it must be legit as it issues accreditations. Smelly ghost at one of Britain's most haunted buildings. A ghost with a personal hygiene issue. Silliest story of the week. A haunted doll weeps tears of acid. What is really silly here is not just the story and the fact that the haunted doll wants to set itself on fire, but the appallingly applied makeup on the doll to make it look scary. And that's all for this week. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill signing off.
Hi there, I'm Abhijit and I host the Rationable podcast on BeRationable.com. Every couple of weeks, I science the hell out of alternative medicines, health and nutrition fads, social media forwards, science news, and lots more. Of course, you can find all of my articles, podcast episodes, and lots more on www.berationable.com. See you there, and until then, always be rationable.
It's time once again to dip into those pages at trove@nla.gov.au, Australia's archive for magazines, newspapers, journals, and so on. And inspired by a story on last week's episode of the Skeptic Zone about numerology, I thought we'd look up numerology. And just to remind you, we quickly look at the Skeptics Dictionary. Numerology. Numerology is the study of the occult meanings of numbers and their influence on human life. Since there are no occult meanings to numbers, and since numbers by themselves can have no significant influence on anyone's life, numerology is nothing but superstition masquerading as science or art. Some alleged psychics, like Uri Geller, claim that numerology helps them understand events such as the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. But as I mentioned on last week's show, numerology is just another prop, like tarot cards or astrology. I see your birth date equals number 6. That means you're likely to, and then put in vague description here. You're an Aries. That means you're likely to. Oh, here's your tarot card. It's the Ace of Swords. That means you're likely to, and so on. But let's have a look to see what has been captured in the pages at Trove. And our first entry comes from 1935, February the 7th, in the Western Mail from Perth, Western Australia. And it's a very short article which simply says, Numerology. It is stated that modern science is proving that everything we touch and see is controlled by the law of vibration. Even everyday numerals are said to vibrate to the heavenly planets. Nadia Shah, the Persian occult numerologist, announces elsewhere in this issue that he will read any set of birth date numerals that are sent to him. That's very intriguing, and this particular issue of the magazine is quite lengthy, and I scoured it, but I couldn't find the announcement, but never mind. Now we jump forward to the year 1992, on the 11th of December, from the Taurus News. Thursday Island, Queensland, that's the islands right up in the north part of Australia. Numerology, part 11. Oh, so there are at least 10 more parts to this series, but let's look at part 11. This week, the master numbers 11, 22, 33, and 44. These numbers were left for the last, deliberately, so that you would have a reasonable understanding of the basic differences between each of the numbers already explained. However, like any science, if variables are introduced, we should expect them to have an influence on the general rule. So I will explain what I mean by that later, like any other science. We have been concerned to date with reducing the birth number to a single digit. But if immediately preceding that, the single digit we see, one of the master numbers, then there will be a marked influence to the general rule. For example, 5 July 1961 reduces to 29. Added together becomes 11, then 2. Because there is a master number, 11, immediately preceding the 2, we must consider that this could influence the general rule. Another example would be 4 January 1952. This reduces to 22, then 4. Here we have the influence of the master number 22. Get the picture? Here are some more to practice with. 20 July 1961, 5 November 1966, 9 May 1981. These numbers are not common, with the 44 being the last common. If you meet or have met someone with this number, you will understand why it is uncommon over the next 2 issues. Okay, let's get to the nitty-gritty. We call the numbers master numbers because their base number, the single-digit reduction number, is greatly amplified due to specific vibrational influences at birth. Refer to part 1 of this series. These particular planetary alignments only occur at certain times, and this is why the master numbers are not as common. The master number 11 has the base number 2. Here the 2 is raised to being the decision maker rather than a follower. Your intuitive powers should be used consistently so that they can be fine-tuned and rely upon giving your strength and confidence to tackle the toughest of assignments. You are an idealist and envisage a world for the benefit of mankind. This vibration strengthens your eagerness to help those in need, but you must remember that this crusade will demand your credibility, and this will only be gained by ongoing study and a thirst for knowledge. Only then will you be able to inspire others to act. Of course, what we're reading now is more or less an example of a Barnum statement. Here's the next paragraph, which starts, "Skepticism is a trait you must control, for it will inhibit your goals." So, you should become more open-minded through more technical and spiritual knowledge. Fiction will satisfy your fantasies, but it will not bear fruit to the cause. As an 11, you must not allow yourself to stagnate. You must be active and be involved in life at all times. You could possibly end up as a leader in public affairs or a lecturer in philosophy. You may even pursue a career in marketing management. Lack of knowledge and discipline to study will prevent growth under this vibration, and the base number 2 will have the predominant influence. See Part 3. Less common than the 11 is the 22, which reduces to a base number of 4. Under this master vibration, you are the one entrusted with financial affairs and general running of the large corporation. Your forte is in money and how to best expand and invest it. Big business and you go hand in glove. You will find that rubbing shoulders with other senior executives is an excellent source for new ideas and innovation. The qualities of honesty, reliability, and integrity under the 4 vibration are emphasized even more as a 22. Accepting responsibility and delegating your authority become natural to your professional and social life. However, as in all of us, the desire to achieve our goals as quickly as possible can tempt us to use unscrupulous and unethical practices. If you live as a negative 22, good grief, if you live as a negative 22, you can cause much pain and anguish in reaching your goal. You must be reminded that you have the power to achieve your goals without using sinister methods. Next week we continue with the master numbers. Now here's the next one, and it comes from the Canberra Times, dated 1995, the 13th of October. Is it just luck or an outside influence? Superstition plays a major part in some players' preparation for those big games, as David Kirkpatrick discovered. In films such as Bull Durham, the wayward pitcher, played by actor Tim Robbins, learns to breathe through his eyelids, wears a suspender belt, and learns to rechannel his sexual energy to help get his aim right. Another player in the team believes in voodoo and blesses his bat with a chicken's foot, while the only confirmed Christian in the team leads prayer sessions before batting practice. In reality, superstitions and playing rituals are far more mundane, with the unshaven look, lucky socks, and underpants some of the favourite foibles of the sporting elite. And while this may say more about a competitor's personal hygiene rather than anything else, there can be no doubting that if it feels lucky, it must be. Cricket is a very superstitious game. Just ask the Waugh twins. And incidentally, Mark and Steve Waugh were very famous cricketers here in Australia a decade or so ago. Apart from having a special knack for running each other out while they are batting, the two brothers both have routines that they follow. Steve apparently has a lucky red handkerchief, while Mark notches each century he scores on his thigh pad. Former Western Australian batsman, now ACT coaching director Mike Valletta, had a spooky experience while fielding at the WACA ground last year. One of the members had been cremated, and his dying wish was to have his ashes spread on the hallowed turf. Normally, the wind would have spread his ashes to the four corners of the ground, but Valletta found himself fielding on top of them in his position at third slip. "It's just lucky I didn't have to dive to take a catch," he said. Numerology also plays a big part in cricket, with 87 considered to be Australia's unlucky number and 111 for England. In the Australian Football League, high-profile Sydney Swans full forward Tony Plugger Lockett always takes his jumper last when they are handed out before the game and has formed a close attachment to one particular pair of underpants. Lockett's former St Kilda teammate, Stuart Lowe, has a little routine that he follows religiously before taking a shot at goal. He always pulls his socks up and makes a mark on the ground from where he intends kicking the ball. Australian basketball superstar Andrew Gaze had a spooky, rather than superstitious experience while playing for Apollon Patras in the Greek League. Comments attributed to him in a Melbourne newspaper about game fixing in Greece came back to haunt him while he was still playing there. He was besieged by players, journalists and angry fans who demanded an explanation. Unable to balance fact from fiction, Gaze soon began to suspect that he was being set up for a hit and slept with a butcher's knife under his pillow. Canberra Cannons centre Ray Borner noted that a number of basketball players like to take the last shot in the warm-up before a game. "I don't know why that is," Borner said. "I guess before the start of the game the last thing they like to see is the ball going through the net." And finally we come to another older entry here. This is from 1937, 23rd of September, once again in the Western Mail from Perth. And it seems to be an ongoing correspondence. Numerology. Dear Non-Com, I promise to write further on the science of numbers, a science that becomes more fascinating the deeper one goes into it. It is always fresh, and its beauty can be treated in many ways. The mathematician can study new calculations. The historian may study the numbers of famous or infamous historical characters. I have already pointed out some of the military figures which, of course, were far from final owing to time and space. By the way, if anyone has read my other figures, starting with the Indian Mutiny, he may possibly call to mind the greater disaster in Afghanistan in 1842, when we lost all our force, including the 44th Foot, with the exception of one man, Dr. Bryden. There are only 9 primal numbers, 1 to 9, and numerology is based on these numbers, because any number, no matter how big, can be reduced to one of these by simply adding from left to right. Surely if you add from right to left it would still work. And reducing till only a single number is left. For instance, 84. 8 plus 4 equals 12, equals 3. 1, 2, 3 equals 6. There are only 9 distinct types of people, each of them governed by one of the 9 primal numbers. They are 1, the aggressive or courageous type; 2, the placid or balanced type; 3, the expressive or active type; 4, the deliberate or cautious type; 5, the versatile or restless type; 6, the dependable or considerate type; 7, the mystic or melancholy type; 8, the successful or powerful type; 9, the universal or magnetic type. And if I do my calculations, it looks like I come out to be a number 6, the dependable or considerate type. We must all belong to one of these types, so I would suggest to readers that they try it on their friends, and they will be surprised at the result. In case anyone should have missed the method of finding the phatic number of a person, take the age, say 20.3.1878. Just remembering this is an old article. Add from left to right, which gives them 29. repeat the operation, which gives 11. Oh, 11. I wonder if this writer knew about the master numbers. Again, repeat, and we get 2 as the phatic number of anyone born on that date. A number 2 person has a keen sense of natural justice, tactfulness, desire for peace, home living instincts, and caution. They are the world's peacemakers. Unselfish, they do not expect any return for their efforts. Content in believing that their virtue is its own reward. Mondays and Wednesdays should be favourable days for number 2 persons. I think I have now written sufficient to set people thinking or start an argument, whichever suits them best. And it's signed simply 7335935 Late RAMC, London. Well, there you go. I wonder what your number is. Is it lucky? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? Not 10. Apparently we're all within the range of 1 to 9 numbers. And I'm a 6. I wonder what you are. Now, of course, there are many, many articles on numerology on the internet. Well, it goes without saying, really. But I was surprised to see so many entries in Australian history going back for so many years. But you too can be surprised when you visit Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, typing in your search, and you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Now, on the 21st of this month, which is coming up soon, I'll be speaking for my friends at the Gold Coast Skeptics. And this is my talk about strange energy and strange devices, updated for 2022. This is about so-called energies unknown to science, and devices being sold which do nothing, and the tricks employed to sell these devices. In fact, I've just come across a new one the other week, which I'll be including in the talk. Believe it or not, it's about socks. Socks. You put these socks on. Or also insoles for your shoes, and they magically increase your balance and your strength, and so on. Sound familiar? It's the old pal band shtick back again. Anyway, I'm looking forward to that, and I've just accepted an invitation to speak for my good friends at the Victorian Skeptics in March, and that will be about the Prediction Project and more. So upcoming talks by me. I will add a link in this week's show notes. Congratulations to Tim Mendham, our reporter, and of course the editor of the Skeptic magazine, who has recently become a Committee for Skeptical Inquiry Fellow. Congratulations, Tim. Welcome to the club. And new members have to buy all the old members a beer when they see them again. So I'll be lining up for that. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, thank you to all those people who support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal, and you can do that at skepticzone.tv. And you are the reason the show continues. I could almost start each episode by saying, the Skeptic Zone podcast this week brought to you by you. So, thank you. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone. visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.